All right, Richard Becker with the Answer Coalition. They're joining us via Skype from San Francisco. Many thanks indeed, sir, for your comments here on Press TV.
Thank you.
Well, the United Nations criticizes the Canadian government over food insecurity and malnutrition in the country. The UN Special Rapporteur on the right to food slammed the government of Prime Minister Stephen Harper for scrapping a 35-year-old long-form consensus. Now, that has made it more difficult. Apologies there. That has made it more difficult to identify and address the problem of hunger in Canada. Olivier De Schutter called on Ottawa to create a national food strategy to help the growing number of vulnerable groups, including indigenous people and those on social assistance. He said a significant number of Canadians do not receive adequate food. De Schutter also criticized Canada for not fulfilling its food security obligations under international conventions. Well, let's cross over to Canada itself. Calgary are joining us from there via Skype is our correspondent Joshua Blakeney. Joshua, thank you for joining us here on Press TV, first of all. Now, looking at the figures that are being presented by the United Nations, very harsh criticism coming out against the Canadian government. But how much of it has to do with the financial crisis that the part of the world is facing right now, and how much of it of the blame lies really on the Canadian government's inadequacy?
Well, Olivier De Schutter has been explicit in delineating a series of policies of the Harper government specifically that he believes has engendered poverty and malnutrition and a dearth of access to food in this country. He noted that 900,000 Canadians each month in the year of 2012 were compelled to go to food banks to plead with charities to give them food. This is in a country that has the third largest oil reserves in the world, where we have the second largest uranium reserves in the world, and yet none of the innate wealth of Canada seems to be percolating down to the people. And so he has adumbrated a series of policies, as you mentioned in your introduction, like the scrapping of the long-form census, so we don't even have any data on the poverty in Canada, which is a very prudent policy of the Harper government, where they actually scrap the ability for us to actually know how many people are living in inequality and poverty in this country by scrapping the obligation to do a long-form census. He's noted that the deregulation and free market policies of the Harper government are not actually engendering sustenance for the majority of Canadians. And so the Harper government doesn't like the UN doing this, doesn't like it for two reasons. In its foreign policy, the Harper government likes to go around the world lecturing other countries on how it should emulate Canada, that Canada is this perfect utopia, this perfect democracy where it's a bed of roses, and that all these other countries in the world should emulate Canada and should listen to Canada when it's lecturing Syria, lecturing Iran on what a perfect democracy looks like. So they don't like it when the UN scrutinizes Canada and shines a spotlight on Canada, because that is inconsistent with how Canada likes to act on the international stage. They don't like it domestically because the Harper government is ideologically a proponent of free market economics, of this notion of trickle-down economic theory, that if you give socialism to the rich, if you give charity to the rich, that everyone will benefit. And the fact that you have 900,000 Canadians having to go and plead with charities in order to eat appears to belie that Milton Friedman-style mythology of the Harper government.
Hey, Joshua, I'd like to pick up on that, actually. Canada is a country that takes pride in its welfare state, that it does provide certain perks to its citizens, unlike the United States. But where did it all go wrong that we're seeing such an increase in poverty and so many people falling through the cracks of the system?
Well, the Harper government, which I remind Press TV viewers, has been accused of having acquired a majority of seats in Parliament in the 2011 election through election fraud. The Harper government was brought from the fringes of Canadian politics through the 80s and 90s to find itself in the 2011 election through hook or by crook with a majority of seats in Canada's Parliament. And so you have this extremist, free market, neoliberal, neocon government, which appears to be incompatible with the values of ordinary Canadians, which is radically altering Canada, which is very good if you're in the 1% of Canadians who benefit from, obviously, socialism for the rich. But if you're the majority of Canadians, obviously the welfare state was something that offered you a safeguard, offered you a safety net, that if your neighbor gets a disease, that you're not going to catch that disease because your neighbor can go and have free healthcare. The Harper government is opposed to free healthcare. that, you know, that your child is not going to, you know, find himself being robbed or mugged on the way to school for food because every Canadian can eat. That was the idea of the welfare state, that there needs to be a safety net for the 10 or 20% who are unable to acquire sustenance in this capitalist system. But the Harper government, as I say, is ideologically a proponent of free market capitalism, even though the facts on the ground don't actually support trickle-down economic theory. That's why they scrapped the census, because they don't actually want data on this. They don't want facts. They don't want the scientific analysis that's necessary in order to defend or dispel a theory. They allege that if you throw money at the rich, that will benefit everyone, and the data doesn't support that, which is why they're trying to prevent data from being acquired, which is why
we're going to have to leave it there. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. Our correspondent Joshua Blakeney there reporting from Calgary via Skype. Joshua, thank you for that update there. Well, that we come to an end of Top 5, but don't go away. I'll be back with plenty of more news right after a short break.
A potentially record-breaking snowstorm called Nemo brought the U.S. Northeast to a grinding halt, killing 9 people just months after Superstorm Sandy